Yeah, that sounds good. So you asked for an introduction, and if I have a hard time understanding, if you were to type in a short version of the question, I'll be able to use that as my guidepost. But hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me clearly. My name is Sarko Gergerian. I'm a police lieutenant on the East Coast of the United States, a city north of Boston, known as Winthrop. I've been a police officer for 15 years, and I came into policing in my 30s. Aside from working as a police lieutenant, doing some really unique type of police work, which we're going to touch upon today. I'm also a psychotherapist that works with adults, mainly nights and weekends, and I'm trained in psychedelic assisted therapy. Happy to be here with you all. Sure, thank you. C.L.E.A.R stands for Community and Law Enforcement Assisted Recovery. In 2014, we connected public health with public safety in Winthrop, Massachusetts. And the way we did that was through people with lived experience in successfully getting over or managing challenges associated with having a relationship with intoxicating substances. So let me just share a little narrative around this because I think it's important. Prior to the start of the shift community, the officers, they review the police logs and police incidents to be caught up with the narrative of the community. A police log is generated anytime somebody calls 911 and asks for help. So the call taker gathers information and they put it in a little narrative within a computer system, and that becomes a police log entry. And if a police officer is dispatched to the situation, that officer may be required to or want to write a police report, which gets linked to that initial police log. So in coming in to do my shift and reviewing all the police logs, after a short period of time, I just realized that there was a ton of actionable information in the police computer system that we weren't doing anything with. If the situation required a police response and the matter did not elevate to the point where it required a case to be made for court, after the officer left, nothing was done with that information that's in the computer systems. I'll give you an example to help clarify. So a family member can call 911 asking for something known as a well-being check because they believe that there's some type of acute emergency happening with a loved one that requires emergency services to get to that person and check in on them. Usually when they call 911, they offer up a lot of information about the situation. The person may have run out of medicine. The person may have a long-standing challenge with depression or anxiety. That's what the impetus for the call was. And we have that information in the computer systems after that call is handled. But traditionally, we don't do anything with it. So after seeing this for a little while, it got to me. And I decided to approach my chief and ask him for permission to create work out of that same data set, right, that the detectives used to create cases for court, to create work for myself, to go back into the community or wherever a person of concern is, meet up with them, ask them if they need help, build trust, and then connect them to legitimate help so that we reduce the likelihood of another call and reduce the likelihood of somebody getting arrested, thereby making everybody safer. And luckily, my police chief gave me permission to go ahead and do that. So I went to him with a problem I came up with a solution. And then I think what sealed the deal was when I told him I would do it on my patrol shift, so it wouldn't cost them any additional money. Yes, so let me start off by saying the program has expanded. We started off by following up with overdose situations, and it turned into all substance use matters, and then all mental health matters. And the next step in the evolution was resource scarcity. And finally, we have now started helping with domestic violence, sexual assault, and family dynamics. Each one of those 4 lanes, I'd like to say, has a caretaker with lived experience. That's a person in the public health department that's helping out the people that give me, the officer, a verbal consent to share their struggles with them. So we have the benefit at this point of hindsight of over 10 years. And there has been a developmental arc as well as culture change associated with it. Very early on, once my police chief realized that people would open up to a police officer who was leading with the truth, when I go and talk to these people, my stated intent is actually to prevent arrest and prevent death. It's kind of counterintuitive. A cop is there working to prevent arrest, but that's the truth. They can feel that. So we immediately created a police policy around the way that the recovery team, as we called it at the time, would be deployed, how we would follow up to matters, find people, talk to them, and what we would offer them as help. And he with his foresight as a chief, said, we're gonna have to put something in policy to prevent the people working on the C.L.E.A.R team from being approached by the detectives investigating matters and creating cases for court to actually initiate arrest. And pretty quickly, remember, this is over 10 years ago at this point, but I did have a run-in with a detective who came to me and was asking me questions with the belief that I would have information for him that would be useful about a particular person, because I was crossing paths with these people and we were having conversations about what they needed to be well. And I was immediately able to say, I don't have to, and I can't share information with you for policy, right? Not that I would have needed the policy, because if you're trying to help somebody and you're just sharing their information with people, that's the quickest way to have a program collapse. So you need confidentiality, you need privacy, and when you say I'm here to help, you gotta really mean it. And when they open up to you about their challenges, you've gotta safeguard that information. And it happened pretty quickly. The detectives approaching to ask me questions, and me being able to lean into the police policy where we had that sentence or two around, this is gonna be a totally different approach, and no one on this side of the house has to speak to the people on the other side of the house.
And how was that?
How was that received when I said that? The detective said, well, I'll just follow you. I'll just drive around and see who you're talking to. And I started laughing because I'm using the same data set they're using, so they know who I'm talking to. They just don't need to know what we're talking about. You know what I mean?
I think you said now that detectives now bring things to you.
Yeah. So like I said, we've been around for 10 years now, and we have a track record of really doing what we say we're gonna do and keeping information confidential and private, and linking people to legitimate help that's available, that knows what they're doing. So what's ended up happening now is we have working men and women referring neighbors, referring family members, approaching us and asking us for help with family members that are in a different city. Because technically we're tasked with focusing on the people in our community, but we don't turn people away. And what we do with somebody in a different city is we work with them to connect them to the legitimate help in their community. So it's really been pretty magnificent to have the police officers reaching out to us for help. Just an example would be with a family member who has a dysregulated relationship with an intoxicating substance. Yeah, I mean, the focus is on well-being, quality of life issues, complex psychobiosocial challenges, right? And just trying to help people incrementally go in a direction of more wellness, and really truly defined by them. Now, we do forward-facing work, right? Which is to connect with the people in our community, the civilians, but we also need to do back-end work, focusing within the organization and the people doing the work themselves. I mean, almost all of the themes associated with helping a civilian be well would apply to a law enforcement person being well. And Chris, this is where there's a little bit of a tension or a challenge, and I think we're going to end up going in this direction, where science is pushing forward and a lot of healing and helpful modalities that are coming online and becoming available to civilians are not going to be available to the police at the same pace for various reasons, whether it's laws, whether it's stigma, prohibitions, fear of drug testing or whatnot, and hopefully we'll touch upon that. But the same principles really do apply, right? We're all people, and we know how people can be and stay well. Yeah, so here's a couple things we do know, and I've shared this in different opportunities that I was lucky enough to be involved in. But we do know that a working law enforcement professional in an average career will absorb in the multiple hundreds of critical incidents into their nervous system. Multiple hundreds. And I use that word critical incident because that's like the worst of the worst situation that someone would have to cope with, right? I don't think I have to explain what some of those things are. You can use your imagination, but horror show level stuff, a person helping with, a person seeing. So not just one, not just two, not just five, right? 200, 300. So that's going to change a person. Just absorbing that stuff into your nervous system begins to change you. And what ends up happening is we work through our careers surviving them, right? And I'm here to say why. Why just survive our careers? Why not thrive in our careers, right? We have officers working with subclinical depression, subclinical anxiety, subclinical PTSD, and I only say that because if they were to go through a full screening or assessment, they'd probably get the diagnostic label. But there's so much stigma around getting a diagnostic label that nobody wants to talk about their challenges, because you'll lose your badge, you'll lose your gun, you'll have to go through a fitness for duty evaluation to get your job back. And if you're carrying your entire family on that paycheck, it's a catastrophe, right? So we suffer in silence, we survive the career, we don't thrive in the career, we make it to retirement, and then 5 to 10 years after that, we die. Marriages fall apart. Anecdotally, at every police training around wellness, somebody asked, what number marriage are you on, right? Raise your hand if you're on your second marriage. Raise your hand if you're on your third marriage. Hands keep going up, fourth marriage, fifth marriage, sixth, what's that all about? And I think it's trauma load over time at these staggering levels. And Chris, when we have an officer lose it, or we act surprised, right? Why are we surprised? When somebody pops, when the pressure cooker is so full of traumatic energy, it's gonna eventually pop. And I don't think it needs to be that way. I think that's probably why we're here talking, right? And we're gonna go further into these discussions, but I think I answered your question. Yeah, so I mean, we know that as stress and trauma increases, many people, not all, many people begin to isolate, right? And we're social creatures, we're social beings. We want to be in a community with others, right? So that's the antidote, right? Less isolation, pulling out of your apartment, pulling out of your own thinking and experiencing other thinking and other ways of being and other people. So if we're working towards wellness, as more wellness increases, well, let's call it wellness capital increases in a community, you end up having more people coming closer to one another in a way that's built upon curiosity and learning about each other and learning about each other's distinct and unique histories and perspectives. Now, Chris, I want to say something about that, because if you're burnt out, if you're severely traumatized, you don't have enough room within yourself to take different perspectives for your own well-being, never mind to take other people's perspective about their historic relation to the country that they live in and be able to handle it, right? So I think as people work on their wellness, they end up having more capacity, not only for themselves, but for other people in the community as well. Absolutely. So let me start off about how that came about. After I had met with my chief and we had spoken, I'd like to think that he recognized that I have a little bit of a different perspective on things. And I was lucky enough to work under a chief executive that allowed space for that different thinking. And he began to take me to the International Association of Chiefs of Police conference. Now that's a really big a conference of a policing conference. It moves from the East Coast to the West Coast of America. International attendance, upper level executives from the law enforcement world. And one year, I went by myself, and it was in Florida. I believe it was Orlando, Florida. And I was looking through the agenda of all the different classes that were available, or presentations that were available. And that year they had allowed Dr. Rick Doblin from the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies, MAPS, to present the phase 2 clinical trial results for something that was listed as MDMA assisted therapy for treatment-resistant severe PTSD. Now, when I saw that, knowing that MDMA, the street chemical associated with MDMA is known as ecstasy, my antennas went up. I was like, what is this? Someone has permission to do research with Schedule I substances? That was really interesting. And then utilizing it to help with treatment-resistant severe PTSD. I mean, that's like the worst of the worst, or the most unshakable, one of the most unshakable anxiety disorders that somebody could end up with. So I was fascinated, and I decided to go see his presentation. And Chris, that was the year that Donald Trump was president, and he happened to contact the conference and say that he'd like to speak to the attendees. And when he came to talk to the attendees, he ended up on the same exact slot as Dr. Doblin. And I totally remember being on the second floor of this gigantic complex, and to the right was Donald Trump, and to the left was Dr. Rick Doblin, and I went left. I picked the blue pill, thank God. And he had this beautiful room. There was like enough space for probably 100 or 200 people in it, and there was about 15 people there. I sat in the front row and got to see clinical results that indicated 67% of trial participants had their treatment-resistant severe PTSD pushed into sustained remission. Sustained remission of treatment-resistant severe PTSD after they took MDMA and did talk therapy. By the time they were done, I was trembling. I was shaking with excitement. I jumped on stage, walked straight up to Dr. Doblin, and I said, "How can I help with this?" And he looked at me like, "Who are you? Why don't you tell me your name first?" You know what I mean? And I said, I told him a little bit about me. And when he found out that I was a police officer and a therapist, he gave me his card and he said, "The best way to help with this," and I'm sharing this with you all because maybe there's some of you inclined in going in this direction of doing this kind of work, is to become a psychedelic assisted therapist or an MDMA assisted therapist. And I took the card and I left and I was like, this is wild. I mean, I'm gonna contact this person. He's probably not gonna get back in touch with me, right? But when I did, he did. He got back in touch with me. I got into the MAPS training, which is a 100-hour training. It's pretty robust training. And then not only did that happen, Chris, but at that time, the federal government had decided to extend permission to 120 people to take MDMA. 120 people that they dubbed healthy normals, right? Because I can't go get involved in a research protocol designed to test for the efficacy of a medicine for depression, right? That'd be saying I'm depressed. You know what I'm saying? Law enforcement can't do that. So I was able to get into this research protocol and experience the MAPS protocol. Okay. So I was able to experience the MAPS psychotherapeutic protocol enhanced by MDMA because I got into this research protocol for 120 healthy normals. Now, MDMA is also known to be what's known as an empathogen. It's a heart opener. Okay, and when the medicine kicked in, I felt like I was in a bubble of love. If you could make this idea of love tangible, I felt like I was swimming in it. And I believe that not only was that created by my heart and my mindset at the time, aided by the medicine, but the two caretakers that were with me, Michael and Annie Midhoff. Michael's a psychiatrist, Annie, his wife, is a nurse. And they get trained in this inner directed or non-directed approach. And I was able to sit in that energy of love. And then I experienced something I call universal or a multi-perspective gratitude. And I say it that way because, there's gratitude. We can all be grateful for the happy things, right? But like, how can you make sense of being grateful for the difficult or sad things, right? But we are a complete package in the present moment of all difficulties and joys that went into making us who we are in the present moment, right? And I was able to utilize that to go into some really traumatic information. I didn't even know I was going to go there. I didn't even know that stuff was going to come up. And for me, it had to do with transgenerational trauma associated with the genocide of the people in Armenia. And that happened in 1950. Who would have thought? And I say it that way because I want to bring one other point out. It's so interesting, Chris. I came from a family that didn't put that information in me. They didn't hammer me with, this is what happened to us, this is, you know what I mean, we're in America, and this is our history. And my mother and father were not really like that, But what was so interesting was all of that and its impact was in me. My whole life was built through that trauma. Yeah, you have it. Now you gotta remember too, I was in a really specific research protocol that allowed me to have access to MDMA once. So we had a placebo day, so I got a blue pill that had probably sugar in it or something. And then I had a medicine day. I just didn't know which day was gonna happen first. So I had access to MDMA one day. But it's built on 3 days with appropriate spacing and preparation sessions without medicine. So the person meets up with a therapist or the therapist team and talks, preparing for the medicine event. And then after you're done, you have integration. So things are gonna come up that you're gonna have to work on fitting into your life when you're in baseline consciousness. So that's all built into the structure. So basically what happens is preparation, building up to the medicine experience, and then integration. So MDMA tempers the amygdala down, and it allows you to go into difficult experiences or memories or thoughts without being completely overtaken by them, without being overwhelmed by them, right? So you could picture taking a little ship into the storm without having the storm capsizing the ship. And MDMA helps you go into that material. And sometimes because you feel safe, it allows you to actually make space in your psychic landscape to allow that information to come up to consciousness so that you can actually look at it. And, you know, we know that a very, very, very small subset of humans actually don't have a conscience, or they don't have the same ability to feel guilt or shame associated with what they do, right? A very small subset. I believe the military says it's like 1% to 2% of the human population doesn't feel guilt or shame related to their actions. Now, if that's the case, 98% of us have some type of conscience. And if we harm another person, we will carry the burden of the guilt or the shame associated to that. So a lot of times, the laws that we're operating under in policing end up creating other human beings as targets for enforcement action. And the enforcement is done on situations that did not cause any harm to another person or another person's property. Let me see if I can clarify what I'm trying to say here. When officers work in the paradigm that we have ourselves in, and they're targeting their enforcement action against people who are participating in self-directed behavior, okay? But the laws say that that self-directed behavior is a crime and that person is a criminal. They have, under the auspices of the paradigm we're in, the legal right to go and direct enforcement action against that person. And many times, that enforcement action can become violent, right? So back to what I said, 98% of people are gonna feel bad. Whether they're aware of it or not, that's gonna be within their psyche and within their nervous system. And that's gonna build up to the point where we can have the influence of moral injury affecting that person, leading towards trauma, stress-related issues, depression, anxiety, difficulty sleeping, anger issues. So there can be a buildup. I don't know if I was able to make the linking there, easy to follow, but I believe that happens. That happens to a lot of law enforcement professionals. Yeah, so I mean, the first thing, and I think I mentioned this, Chris, is that you have to become aware of what's in there, right? And if it's really painful stuff about yourself, you might not feel capable of looking at that without becoming overwhelmed. So you push it down, you stuff it down, you don't think about it, right? But MDMA may be able to open that up for some people and have those things come up so that they can look at them and come to terms with them. And I love what you just said, and extend and afford some self-compassion. Because once you have self-compassion, you can have other focused compassion as well. But we have to get to the point where we can help trigger that, right? And MDMA can be one of those catalysts. MDMA can trigger that. So I think that's the point that I'd like to try to make with you here. is that if this medicine can help trigger self-compassion, we could end up having a situation where more people have access to that, and if we have access to that, we can share. And don't we want our first responders to be well and resilient and okay with themselves, so that when they show up to help our family members, that they can extend what the family members need to them, which may be, right, empathetic, caring, helping hand. Absolutely. Yeah, we are in an exciting time here in the US. We're waiting on hearing word back from the federal government, the regulators at the federal level, by August. And fingers crossed, they will come back with MDMA assisted therapy, MDMA with therapy, as the prescription for treatment-resistant severe PTSD. That's going to be the first time that has happened at the federal level with a Schedule I substance. But another thing I'd like the audience to know is that it's also going to be the first time that a medication paired with therapy is the prescription. Okay, yeah, let's clarify that, right? And I've been saying this from the beginning of this conversation with you all. First responders, and this is, fire, medical, police, including, medicals in there, of course, all kinds of first responders. There is heavy stigma on getting a diagnostic label. So we suffer in silence, and we isolate, and we keep to ourselves, and we don't tell people we need help. We don't tell people we're not sleeping well, right? Arguments happening at the house, anger outbursts here, there, and everywhere. So, when this becomes medicalized, and when MDMA is a medicine paired with therapy, it's going to be for a very specific disorder that, you don't just go get, right? People don't want to have PTSD, severe PTSD. Our people aren't going to have access, easy access to it. And this brings up one additional thing I want to say. We know, and the federal government knows, people in medicine know, First Nations people and Indigenous wisdom keepers know that a lot of these medicines can be used to stay well, right? We know that this is possible, and we know that that's the case. So what I like to speak about is, why don't we look at that? Why don't we talk about self-care access to MDMA? Why don't we talk about self-care access to psilocybin, to ketamine, right? Absolutely. You said that so eloquently. Exactly. We know the career-associated risks. I think we're on the hook to figure out how to mitigate those risks before the person is so unwell that they become a danger to themselves and to others. The career can do that. The career can make the worker a risk to themselves and to others. We are responsible for helping mitigate that and changing that trajectory. And that information is out there. The research indicates